What are the rules, expectations, and norms? How do I live by all of them? Do I want to live by these rules? Who gets to make the rules for my life?
Well, when my wife was in high school, she had half of her head shaved. She wore all black. She listened to The Cure. She was part of what was called the punk culture. And later this would morph into what was called the Goth culture. And part of the appeal of kind of finding our way into groups like this is to be different from the norm. The irony is that when enough of you are doing it, like if your desire is to all become different, you become the same. And so Goth fashion rules kind of like rebelled against normal fashion rules by being all black. But there were still clear rules in the Goth community. For example, well-established Goths could wear baby pink in addition to all the black because it was ironic. But if you wore it without having the proper standing as a Goth, you were showing that you really didn't fit in with the rest. Like you have to conform to the strict rules of nonconformity. That's the ironic part. So this has come full circle in a new fashion trend called normcore. I've got a couple of pictures here for you to see. Radical fashion statement here. I just call it putting on clothes like jeans and a t-shirt, but it's described as a bland anti-style where you dress in a conventional and nondescript way. According to one fashion editor, they said normcore moves away from coolness that relies on difference to a post-authenticity coolness that opts into sameness. But instead of appropriating an aestheticized version of the mainstream, it just cops to the situation at hand. To be truly normcore, you need to understand that there's no such thing as normal. So profound, clear as mud. It's funny to me, though, that we all have this need to conform rebelliously. It's also interesting to think about who makes these rules, who determines these norms. That's question number 2 from the book that we're using this month as our jumping off point, Making Faith Magnetic by Daniel Strange. We're exploring how to share our Christian faith in a magnetic way in an increasingly post-Christian world. Strange says that there are 5 universal longings that people have. And if we could just recognize those longings in conversations and then winsomely point people to Jesus, well, we'd be onto something. And so these 5 basic human longings can be framed as 5 questions. Is there a way to connect? Is there a way to live? Is there a way out? Is there a way to control? And is there a way beyond this life? Those are 5 permanent itches that all people seem to be trying to scratch. And a person's worldview is going to determine how they chase after each of those things. But we're all chasing them. And the point is that these longings were placed inside us by God himself. And so it's not that the longings are wrong. They're actually good and right. But sometimes we seek to fulfill them in wrong and insufficient places, when the only fulfillment for them is Jesus Christ himself. And so last week, we talked about our desire for connection. And today we're going to talk about a way to live. In fact, here's today's big idea. Everyone is asking, who decides the right way to live? So in order to live in a society, we all live by standards and rules and norms. We know we need them, but sometimes we buck up against them. A norm is simply a way to live. And we all have this sense deep down that there's a right way to live, that there are norms and rules that we should all follow. And at the same time, we also long for freedom and independence from what can seem sometimes like random rules and norms. And so as you think about yourself, I would ask you to, are you a rule keeper or are you a rule breaker? Like some of this is personality. Some of us are by nature a little bit more safe, a little bit more conservative. You think our society would be a better place if everyone just would follow the rules. Others take pride in being rebels, like they never met a rule they didn't want to break. If it says 55 miles per hour, 70 seems about right. If it says take 1, you take 3. And so, there's a personality aspect to this, but there's also something else going on, I think. Like a big factor in our willingness to follow rules comes down to who's making the rules. Do you respect them? Are they trustworthy? Are they living out the rules themselves, or are they hypocrites? And do you see the rules that they're making as valuable to you? And so I want to give some examples from the pandemic. And I'm not trying to rile anybody up, but I think there's so much to learn from this concentrated global experience that we all had. Things were revealed about humanity and our human systems and our human nature like never before in our lifetime, especially in this arena of social rules and norms. Like I think about how the rules developed over the pandemic. It moved from, strong recommendations at the beginning, be safe, wash your hands for 20 seconds, sing happy birthday twice. Remember that? And then it moved to this kind of nebulous plea for respect for others and loving your neighbors to eventually people prevented from traveling and being fired from their jobs for not getting a vaccine. People being publicly shamed for gathering with 8 people when only 6 were allowed. My wife's a contractor, and in the early days of COVID, she and my daughter went to a new home that she was building, just the two of them, to work inside. Every day, a man threatening to turn them into the authorities would come, and from the street, he would video my daughter working in the house to collect evidence against them. Again, a grown man videoing a teenage girl in a house under regular circumstances would be completely unacceptable behavior. In this case, he thought he was totally justified in doing this. And then we got to observe when competing rules and norms collided. Think about how the strict lockdowns were suspended for anti-racism protests, where tens of thousands of people gathered in very close proximity. Some rules were superseded by other unwritten rules about what was most important at the time. Again, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just observing how our relationship with rules and norms was on full display. And I think so much of a person's willingness to trust those rules came down to who was making the rules and how reliable were those people. And so in the early days of the vaccine, for example, prominent Democrats were saying, don't get the vaccine if Trump is in charge. And then at the changing of power, Republicans, started stoking the vaccine hesitancy fires. And then it came out that government officials who were enforcing lockdowns were having private parties themselves or traveling across state lines to visit family or getting their hair cut when no one else could. And then it began to undermine the rules. And we're left again asking the question of the day. Is there a right way to live? And if there is, who gets to decide that? Because it seems like the people who are deciding inevitably become corrupt and untrustworthy when they get a little bit of power. Now add to that, in these days, it's not enough to try to just live a virtuous life. You need to be seen as virtuous. There's this new phenomenon called virtue signaling, which is the need to make sure everyone knows where you stand on every issue. And it takes important personal beliefs and it makes them performative. And it's exhausting to not only try to do the right things, but then to make sure everyone is aware that you're doing and saying the right things and identifying with the right groups. From protesters demanding that outdoor diners raise their fist in solidarity with their cause, to President Trump holding a Bible upside down in front of a church for a photo op, to changing your profile picture to stand with, fill in the blank, whatever the latest cause is. Virtue signaling adds a lot of pressure to life. And it's all just moving so fast, like what you need to stand up for and whose side you need to be on today and what issue is most important to stand up for today and who gets to decide these things. And are they trustworthy? And I come back to that again, our big idea that just asks who decides the right way to live. And you and I are going to make decisions for the rest of our lives around that question. Does the government get to decide? Is your family of origin, is like that the way that you decide? That's the way my mom and dad always did things. Is it your church background that decides? Is it the way you were educated? Like, does your favorite college professor or advisor get to decide? Or is it you? Are you the final authority about the right way to live in this world? Like, we hear that all the time too. Speak your truth. No one gets to tell you how to live. You're the final authority. And before you say, yeah, that's the one, I just get to decide my own rules. Let me just say, we do need outside standards that are in place, that are outside of ourselves. Like, we may not like it sometimes. We may struggle to live by them sometimes, but we can't live without them. Imagine just games or sports. Like, as a kid, do you remember how frustrating it was to play a game with another kid who made up the rules as they went along? Or they changed the rules right at the end to make sure that they won? Like, or imagine just a sport, a football or baseball game, where every player who was on the field just got to make up their own rules. Like, it would be mass chaos and absolutely no fun. The boundary lines that are agreed upon, they are rules that make it both functional and fun. And so a world without rules is not what we really want. You remember this Chaz experiment in Seattle in 2021 where the only rule was freedom. Like, anarchists that didn't believe in control or authority of any kind. Like, they're anti-gun, anti-police, anti-borders. They set up Chaz, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, just a little slice of heaven on earth with no laws and rules, just free. It turned out to not be so free. It quickly turned into chaos in the streets with strict borders enforced by a police-like security unit armed with heavy artillery. All of a sudden, this rule-free zone had all kinds of rules, enforcing the very things that they were most against. So my point, even people who are most against rules in the end realize that we need rules to survive and thrive as a people. The question is, who gets to decide? Who will decide the right way to live? Generally speaking, in order to trust an authority, for example, for a way to live, we typically ask three questions, the three criteria for trusting an authority figure. One, do they have knowledge? Like, do they have all the facts? Do they know what they're talking about? Two, is their character trustworthy? Do they have integrity? Do they use their own products? Do they buy what they're selling? Can they be trusted? Three, are they effective? Like, does what they say is going to happen? Are they right about stuff? Do their plans work? Is there a proven track record of success? These are the kinds of things that are important to us when we're deciding who we will trust when it comes to the right way to live. Now, the foundation of this series is that these longings are good. Like the longing to have an agreed upon way to live. That thing that's inside us, it's a gift. But often we try to fulfill those longings in places and people that won't ultimately satisfy. In fact, the longings can only be truly fulfilled as we position ourselves in right relationship with the God who created us and Jesus Christ, his Son, and our Savior. And so I take you today to a passage in John 14:6, and I want you to see that Jesus shows us the way to live. And not only that, but he's an authority figure who proves to be trustworthy in all three ways that I just mentioned. So I want you to look at this verse. Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But when we meet the person of Jesus in the Gospels, like he meets all those the criteria of a trusted authority figure. He has the knowledge, he has the character, and he was radically effective. Daniel Strange says it this way. He says, when it comes to the norm, Jesus doesn't just reveal that there is a standard. He says, I am the standard. He is the rule book. He is the blueprint. The norm of which we are aware, even if only faintly, is not a set of dry, abstract, and impersonal rules, but is embodied in a magnetic person named Jesus. So as an authority on human life, Jesus is to be trusted. He doesn't make us choose between either rules or relationships or between love and obedience. In Jesus, these are in harmony. He's worthy of both our love and our obedience. He provides the key to the right way to live by being in relationship with him. You know, when people think about the Bible, especially the Old Testament, they often think about it as one big rule book. I mean, you got the 10 commandments, and you have all these Levitical laws, and without recognizing that what God was after in all those rules and laws was human flourishing. There's an old Hebrew word that's used in the Old Testament called shalom. It's a hard one to translate, but I think flourishing captures it best. It means wholeness, it's completeness, it's living at peace and in harmony with both God and people. Shalom is when all our needs are satisfied, all our purposes are deployed under the arc of God's incredible love. Sound like paradise? It's what you were created for. You see, when God made the world, like when he set up the rules, it was for his glory and it was for our flourishing. When God created you, like that's what he had in mind, flourishing. But we recognize all around us that the flourishing has faded and it's sometimes even non-existent. Our society is as fractured as it's ever been, divided by politics and race and economics, and marriages are struggling and kids disrespecting and jobs unfulfilling, and we wonder, like, where's the shalom? The problem is not God. The problem is that we've gotten off track. We've lost our way. And so Jesus arrived on the scene and he made this profound statement in Matthew 5:17. He says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. When he says law and prophets, he's speaking about the Old Testament, the rules and laws. And he said, listen, I came to fulfill them. Those things were pointing to me all along, and they find their completion in me. And so if we want to find a way to live, a way to the human flourishing that God had in mind for us, we look to Jesus, who says it all gets fulfilled in me. The key is in Jesus' teaching and in his lifestyle. And so how do we respond? Well, Jesus spoke to that too. A lawyer came up to him one day and asked him to summarize the most important rules from the Old Testament. He summed it up by saying in Matthew 22:37-40, he said, this is the way of life that Jesus offers us. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments, Jesus said, depend all the law and the prophets. Love God and love people. It's the key to life. It was also the punchline of the series that we just concluded a couple months ago in the book of Ecclesiastes. But I want to circle back to Jesus' claim in John 14:6, because I really do think that it holds the key to a way to live, the way to live. Remember, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And when he starts that sentence with these words, I am, this is no small thing. In fact, it provides the credibility for what he's about to claim. Let me give you a quick history lesson. Back in Exodus 3, when God called Moses from the burning bush and he asked him to lead his people from slavery, and Moses asked a very rational question. He said, like, when I get there, when I get in front of Pharaoh and he asked me, like, who sent you? What is the name of the one who sent you? Then what shall I tell him? And for the first time, God reveals his name to humanity. And he says, here's what to say. Tell them, I am sent you. His name is just I am, a subject with no predicate. And for generations, devout Jews were not even allowed to speak the name of God. They were not even allowed to say this I am word. It was considered blasphemy. But then Jesus appears on the scene, and he does more than just speak the name of God. He claims it for himself. And the people and the religious leaders are just all trying to figure out who this Jesus was. Is he a demon? Is he a magician? Like, how do we account for these amazing things that he's doing? And then one day, Jesus starts talking about Abraham like he knew him personally. And the religious leaders say, listen, you're not even 50 years old. How do you know Abraham? And Jesus answers with these exact words. He says, before Abraham was, I am. He wasn't using bad grammar. He was applying the name of God to himself. And the people knew exactly what he was doing because they picked up stones and tried to kill him. Nobody does that. So when Jesus says, I am, he's claiming to be God. He's claiming to be one with God. When you read the Gospel of John, you'll see that he starts filling in all the missing predicates. And it's a reminder to us that God wants to be known. He wants us to know who he is. And he wants us to know what his ways are that are going to lead us to that life of flourishing. And so if we're spiritually hungry, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And to those walking in darkness, Jesus says, I am the light of life. And if we fear death, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And if we're looking for a way to live, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. So he says, I am the way. Notice he used the definite article to distinguish himself as the only way. So a way is a path or a route. And the disciples had expressed their confusion about where he was going and how they could follow him there. But he had told them from the beginning. He was telling them again. He said, just follow me. I'm the way. There's no other path to heaven, no other way to the Father except through me. And then he says, I am the truth. Again, he used the definite article to emphasize himself as the only truth. He didn't say, I know the truth. He didn't say, I speak the truth. He said, I am the truth, which means when we look at his life, when we study his teachings, he was right about everything. And so he gave us the truth. And then he says, I am the life. He is the source of life. He also shows us the way to live our lives. You know, before our movement was called Christianity, it was simply called the way. Followers of Jesus weren't known for their doctrines. They weren't known for their rules or their stances on certain issues. They were just known for the way that they conducted their lives, the way. So Jesus showed us and he told us the right way to live. And he can be trusted. And so the true norm and the true standard for how to live is not a rule book. It's not a constitution. It's not a set of codified laws. Instead, it's a person, Jesus Christ. Like, it's amazing to hear even more and more secularists and atheists acknowledging these days that even though they may not surrender their lives to Jesus, they owe many of the values and norms that have shaped our Western culture that they appreciate most to the influence of Jesus Christ. Things like equality and fairness and humility and mercy can be traced to Jesus. And so I believe that this truth gives us one of our greatest opportunities in America for sharing our faith. Like, we get to demonstrate an allegiance that is above political party lines these days. Yeah, Jesus sometimes agrees with Republicans and sometimes he agrees with Democrats, but he doesn't fit neatly into either category. And I believe this gives us an opportunity to rise above the debate and to point people to a better way, to point people to Jesus, to tell others that longing that you feel inside to be right, to signal your virtue, to advocate for your cause, that instinct that you feel that says, well, when somebody doesn't agree with me on this, like I think they're actually wrong, that instinct deep down, there's a right way to live. That's good. That's from God. But it'll only truly be fulfilled when it's fulfilled in Jesus. He is, after all, the way and the truth and the life. And one more important truth before we work this out practically. Jesus is not only the standard, but the Savior. You see, if he only gave us the standard, we would be frustrated to the point of hopelessness. Like trying to keep your own rules and your own strength breeds hypocrisy, but walking with Jesus fosters humility. And then failing to live up to the standards that you've set or that someone sets for you, it breeds anxiety and guilt and downright hopelessness. But embracing Jesus allows us to rest in the goodness of his grace. We no longer need to feel tyranny of any kind or being oppressed by anyone else's expectations. We have freedom in his grace. As Dr. Strange says, Jesus is the standard we all want, and Jesus is the Savior we all need. But here's the thing, you can't have one without the other. We all have a sense that there's a right way to live. Who gets to decide? Well, my conclusion is that there is only one who's qualified. There's only one who had all the knowledge at his disposal, only one who proved to be completely trustworthy in his character, only one who was right about everything that he did and everything that he predicted, and that's Jesus Christ. And our sole job as Christians is to point people to him. As you hear this longing for a way to live come up in conversation, I pray that today's message will have prepared you to point people to him. We're now going to move into a time that we're calling a preparation for conversation. I'm going to invite your host now to walk you through making this message personal and practical to you. I love you guys.